Welcome to Accounting 202, Managerial Accounting at Kapiolani Community College. In this video, we'll look at Chapter 22 and the idea of pricing in managerial accounting. Pricing is very important, and in many cases, the market will set our prices for us. In the case of pure competition, such as sellers at a swap meet, you can't vary too far from a competitive price or nobody will buy your product. In the case of monopolistic competition, for example, something like household products, each seller is trying to make their product different from the others, but they're essentially pretty similar. So they try using different marketing techniques in order to differentiate their products. Still, they have a certain band of prices that they kind of have to fall within. Oligopolistic competition, for example, airlines, hard to get in that market. Once you're in it, they tend to move in similar patterns as far as their pricing. So there are a few price setters and no one can vary too far from the price without backlash. So if you set your price too high, then you won't have any sales and you'll have a net loss. If you set your price too low, then you won't have any profit and you'll have a net loss. So you kind of need that price right at the sweet spot. The basic relationship between cost, markup, and price I've tried to lay out in several simple little formulas shown here. And you can use these relationships to help you find some missing elements. For example, cost plus profit is our price. And if you have some kind of a markup based on the cost as your profit, then you can just plug that in right there. Or if you know the price and you know the profit, then you can back into the cost. If you don't know the profit, you can take the price times perhaps a retail markup, which is based on a percentage of the price, and back into your profit, and then use that to come up with price minus profit and your allowable cost. Other options, outside items such as the amount we have invested in a particular project or a department or so forth, take that investment amount and the return on investment that we require for our time and energy, and that'll generate the amount of profit that we need, which can be used in any one of these cost, profit, price formulas. So target cost is pretty easy to do. If you are assume that you have a market pressure for some kind of maximum price, then what is the max you can cost in terms of your production in order to get the return on your investment that you want. So you take the market price per unit that's kind of set by the market, back out the desired profit that you need, and that'll tell you your target cost per unit. Well, how do you get the desired profit? Could be a set price, could be some unknown cost, markup based on cost, or it might be by reference to something such as investment and your ROI. So investment times your desired ROI percentage divided by how many units you think you're going to produce would give you your desired profit per unit. So market price minus that desired profit would tell you your target cost per unit. Cost plus pricing is really great to do if you can do it. If you have a customer who's willing to be charged that way, typically most people want at least a fixed price of some kind, and so it's not an option unless you have a unique product or service that the buyer can't get anywhere else, and that will give you unusual pricing power. Usually you base the plus on a percentage of the cost instead of a fixed dollar amount. And so if you get a fixed dollar amount, it's typically you want to convert it to a percent to use that in different jobs with different base costs. So formulas you can use. The markup is a dollar amount. If you take the cost per unit and your dollar amount of markup that you need per unit, then you get your target selling price per unit. However, like I said, you generally want the markup as a percent, and that times the cost per unit would give you your markup per unit, and therefore the target selling price per unit. So you can get your markup percent by the markup divided by the cost, and that'll give you markup times cost to use where you need it. Time and material pricing is something kind of like activity-based marking up, where you look at the different factors of production and kind of all the related costs that help make up that action that your company or that function that your company does. And so you pretty much have to do a cost study, come up with how much it costs you to do labor or materials loading, uh, which is really materials handling. And then you keep those costs segregated as to the factor that they relate to, and that helps you figure out how much you want to charge. So first you got to like figure out how much your rate is for labor and how much it is for material loading. So the labor rate per hour labor charge, you take your total annual budgeted time charges that you think you're going to be charging and your budgeted annual labor hours, and you get the per hour labor cost. So your total budgeted time charges would be your total annual direct labor and other overhead, manufacturing and selling and administrative that relates to the labor. And that per hour labor cost plus your per hour profit margin that you want will give you a per hour labor charge. So per hour profit margin could be a flat number or it could be a percent of the labor cost, or it could be some other percent. Typically not though. Also, you can calculate your material loading rate, which is a percentage of your material charges. So take your total budgeted annual material loading charges for the whole year and divide that by total annual invoice cost for your parts and materials. In other words, all your purchases of parts and materials or usage of it rather. And then the material loading percentage cost you get from that. The total annual budgeted material loading charges would be your total annual cost of material handling personnel and all your other overhead that's related to material handling. And you take that material loading percentage cost, add the profit margin, typically a percentage that you want on it, and you'll get your material loading rate. Now, that could also be, it's typically a percent. Okay, so the per hour labor charge and material loading rate, you use them together on customer invoices, and you have to handle them separately. So whatever your labor rate is times your labor hours would be your labor charge. So we computed that labor rate up above. And whatever your material cost is, plus your material cost times the material loading rate, is your materials charge. So this is quite a common kind of occurrence. For example, auto mechanic will charge you a certain labor rate, which is loaded for all of the things that they want to recoup through their labor, and a material cost, which is their wholesale purchase price for the parts that they use in your car, plus a markup on it based on material handling and profit. Transfer pricing occurs when we're looking at transfers of items, typically components between units of a company or between the parent and a subsidiary, like a company that owns another company. And it's really pricing for our internal customers. Now, negotiated price is kind of simple to explain, but I'm sure hard in practice. You need to know for the negotiated price to work, it needs to be more than the minimum acceptable transfer price, but less than what you could buy it from an outside supplier for. If you have no available excess capacity, then the variable cost plus an opportunity cost component representing your lost contribution margin is how you'd set your minimum transfer price. If, however, so if you have an outside supplier price that's above the minimum transfer price, then the minimum transfer price is acceptable. If not, then it's not acceptable. How about if we have excess available capacity? Then your variable cost with nothing else is your minimum transfer price. This, however, could create problems with cost controls in your transferring, and it might also cause you issues with motivation or incentivizing your employees to get them to do what they're supposed to be doing. Here's some exercises like the do it exercises from chapter 22. Here's an assumption here, and we're trying to do like target costing. If we assume we're going to sell 1,095,300 units this year, and our maximum price set by the market is $5, and we want a 24% return on our investment in this line of business, then our revenue will be the number of units we're going to sell times the max price, and our profit will be the percent return that we need on our investment. And so if you back the profit out from the revenue, you'll get our allowable costs. And if you break that down per unit, that will be the allowable cost divided by the assumptions. So that's a target costing example. How about target selling price? Let's look at all the costs that we have related to the production. Total cost $44. And if we need a 38% markup on that, then our computed markup would be $16.72, and our target selling price would be the sum of those two guys. Okay, how about cost plus? And this is where we have the differentiated rates for labor and for material handling, loading. The repair technician's wages we figured out are going to be 131,000 for the year, 070. Fringe benefits can be 41,000. Overhead can be 65,000. So total cost would be 237,762. Now estimated hours of labor for the year 5,100. So 237,762 is all those costs there. And our cost per hour then comes out to $46.62. If our labor markup is 50%, and we'll get a profit margin per hour of 23.31, and set our billing rate at the sum of those two guys there, cost per hour and profit margin per hour. Now, if our hours that we spend working are 1.5 hours, our labor charge would be $104.90. Now, if the materials cost is $64.56 and our material loading charge is 60%, then we'll get a material loading factor of 38.74, and our total cost would be $208.19. Now, this one does not require us to come up with a material loading cost percentage, but it would occur somewhat like this one over here. Okay, thanks for listening. Hope this helps.